From time to time, the NFL finds itself revisiting its rulebook, prompted by players' aggressive tactics or their exploitation of existing rules. Among these players, there are those who have had such a profound impact on the game that they've actually reshaped NFL rules, either through their on-field performance or the events that unfolded around them. So these are the NFL players that change the rules. Starting off, we gotta talk about Mel Blount. Mel Blount is a name that rings loud in NFL circles as he was a key part of the mighty Steel Curtain defense in Pittsburgh. Standing tall at 6'3" and weighing 205 pounds, he gave opposing wide receivers a tough time. And I mean a real tough time. Mel made life miserable for those receivers, and not many of them got the chance to make catches against him. He played with such aggression that no other cornerback could match. Mel had this unique style of play and had mastered the art of the bump and run. And back in those days, defensive backs could give the receiver a good shove down the field, and Mel took full advantage of that. In 1975, he snagged 11 interceptions in a single season. That's some impressive stuff right there. His play was so intimidating that the NFL had to step in. By 1977, they said, enough is enough, and they came up with a rule called the Mel Blount rule. This rule said that defensive players couldn't jam offensive players more than 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. If they did, it would be called defensive pass interference. This rule, my friends, opened up the passing game like never before. It made sure receivers didn't get flattened by defensive backs while trying to make catches. And guess what? Quarterbacks started racking up more and more passing yards than ever. But Mel wasn't done even after the rule change. He kept on terrorizing those receivers and eventually got himself a spot in the Hall of Fame. And speaking of game-changing rules, let's dive into one that quarterbacks absolutely love, the Carson Palmer rule. You see, folks, the NFL is all about quarterbacks. And back in 2004, there was a rising star in the league named Carson Palmer. He had won the Heisman Trophy back in college, and he was leading the Cincinnati Bengals to what looked like a deep playoff run. Now, in the AFC wildcard game of that 2004 season, the Pittsburgh Steelers were up against their AFC North rivals, the Cincinnati Bengals. It was a big matchup, and on the very first pass play of the first quarter, Carson Palmer dropped back and threw a massive 66-yard bomb to his receiver, Chad Johnson. That play set a Bengals team record for the longest playoff reception. But here's where things took a twist. After the big reception and all the celebrating, they realized something was wrong. Carson Palmer was still down on the field, and it wasn't good news. You see, Steelers defensive tackle Kimo von Oelhoffen had tackled Palmer below the knee after he threw the ball, and it resulted in a fractured ACL and MCL, ending Palmer's season and crushing the Bengals' playoffs hopes. Believe it or not, this wasn't the first time a quarterback had been hit and injured like this in that same year. Brian Grease had suffered a similar injury earlier in the season. So the NFL decided it was high time to make the game safer for their star quarterbacks. They went into the rulebook and made it illegal to hit a quarterback at or below the knee with the Carson Palmer rule. But the rules got even stricter after the 2008 NFL season when Tom Brady suffered a season-ending ACL and MCL injury in a similar incident. So, thanks to Carson Palmer and a few others, the NFL made sure to protect its quarterback. Speaking of aggressive tackles, let's talk about Roy Williams. Roy Williams played safety and was an incredible tackler back in the day. For a solid 9 years, Roy Williams lit up the league with his skills. And you know what? He made it to the Pro Bowl 5 times in a row, from 2003 to 2007. But Roy was famous for his bone-crushing hits. He had this move he loved called the horse collar tackle. It was his signature move, and everything was all fun and games until some players started getting hurt. Musa Smith ended up with a broken leg, Donovan McNabb got injured, and poor Terrell Owens suffered a broken ankle, all thanks to Roy Williams and his horse collar tackles. It got so bad that the NFL had to step in. In 2006, they put the kibosh on the horse collar tackle with the horse collar rule. That rule said players can't grab the inside collar of the back or side of the shoulder pads or jersey and pull the runner toward the ground. And in 2007, he got a 1-game suspension because he just couldn't resist the temptation. He got flagged for 3 horse collar penalties that year. That said, when it comes to changing the rules in football, there's usually a wild play that sparks it all. And one particularly interesting case is that of Phil Dawson. In 2007, Phil Dawson, the legendary kicker for the Cleveland Browns, lined up for a colossal 51-yard field goal against the Baltimore Ravens. He gives it his all, and just when you think you've seen it all, something outrageous happens. The ball smacks the goalpost, then bounces off the upright support beam, and to everyone's surprise, it takes a wild detour back through the uprights and into the end zone. Now, here's where it gets really confusing. The referees initially wave it off as a no-good kick because they see the ball lounging in the end zone. But if you were watching from a different angle or had the superpower of video replay, you'd know it was clear as day that the call was all sorts of wrong. The hitch was that back then, referees weren't allowed to use video replay for field goal attempts that hit the uprights. Thankfully, another referee dashed over to discuss went down, and they corrected the call and said Dawson's field goal was indeed good. The league realized they had to prevent more of these head-scratching moments, so they introduced the Phil Dawson rule. With the Phil Dawson rule in play, field goals and extra point attempts that hit the uprights or crossbar can get a second look. Anyways, dive into one of the absolute best parts of football, touchdown celebrations. I mean, can you even imagine a touchdown without some wild, over-the-top celebration? And speaking of celebrations, there's this thing called the Jimmy Graham rule. You see, Jimmy Graham was a tight end for the New Orleans Saints and had this thing going on for years where he'd score a touchdown and then show off his amazing jumping and dunking skills. But in 2014, the NFL decided they'd had enough and said, no more dunking. But Jimmy did not listen. He dunked not once, but twice during a preseason game right after the rule came into play. However, he got a little reminder in the form of a $30,000 fine, and that dunking show was over. As crazy as that was, have you ever wondered why NFL players don't take off their helmets when they're celebrating? Well, we can thank Emmitt Smith and Brett Favre for that one. Emmitt Smith played 15 seasons in the NFL and holds the records for most rushing yards ever and had a thing for taking off his helmet after scoring a touchdown. But then on January 26, 1997, Brett Favre scored a touchdown, and he got excited, ripped off his helmet, and sprinted off the field. Then the NFL decided to ban players from taking off their helmets on the field, especially during touchdown celebrations. And even though it's often called the Emmitt Smith rule, it was Brett Favre who made it famous with his helmet-popping celebration. But hey, sometimes a newfangled tech zooms ahead of the NFL rulebooks. And speaking of innovation touchdowns, we gotta talk Stick'em. Before 1981, the NFL hadn't said a word about this sticky stuff called Stick'em. It's like glue for football players, and it makes catching balls way easier. Wide receivers loved it, but Lester Hayes, a cornerback from the Oakland Raiders, slapped that Stick'em on so thick that his teammates had to wrestle the ball from his clutches in practice. And Hayes was like a magnet for footballs that season, catching interceptions left and right. I'm talking 19 interceptions in one season, regular and postseason combined. But Stick'em magic was short-lived, because in the offseason, the NFL said, no more Stick'em with the Lester Hayes rule. Now switching gears to another tech twist in football history, the Tom Dempsey rule. Tom Dempsey, a New Orleans Saint kicker, was one cool cat. You see, he was born without toes on his right foot, but he didn't let that stop him. He wore a funky shoe, and guess what he did? He kicked a jaw-dropping, record-setting 63-yard field goal. But some folks in the media and other players cried foul. They thought his special shoe gave him an unfair edge. So after much back and forth chatter, the NFL stepped in and created the Tom Dempsey rule in 1977. It said, if you've got an artificial limb on your kicking leg, your shoe's kicking part has to look just like a regular kicking shoe. In the ever-evolving world of football, these players left their indelible mark in the pages of the NFL rulebook, and their actions continue to influence the game as we know it today. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this edition of End Zone Football. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with other fans of the NFL.